It's 5 to 7. He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop them on someone.
Well, hello and welcome to June 1942 episode of Islands of War with me, Keith Bengelli, and my co-host,
Nick Lahure. Hi, Keith.
Hi, Nick. Really good to see you. So everybody knows by now what we're doing. We're concentrating this month on June 1942, as I say, and we're going to dive straight in, Nick. Lots happening in Jersey.
Yeah, we've got loads of Jersey stuff, actually, but we've got plenty of Guernsey stuff as well, but I've been digging in the Jersey archives because there's a couple of events that we touched on last month, which had an impact on this month as well. So we're going to start off with, we talked a little bit last month, or I think it was last month, or maybe in April, about moving between the islands and how it can be it was a bit tricky because you had to get permission and it might not be granted because you had to jump through hoops with both the German Feldkommandantur, so that's the German civilian affairs, effectively, and also with the civilian government as well as to whether it's possible. So we've got a Mr. Wilfred Legg, who was a Jerseyman who was actually working in Guernsey when the Germans arrived. He was a cobbler, so I presume he was probably a visiting cobbler here.
So a cobbler called Legg.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Anyway, he was here in Guernsey when the Germans arrived. So his house was unoccupied in Jersey. So he'd wrote to his friend, Mr. Carter of Tyler's King Street, asking him if his house was okay. He's taken a couple of years to write because this is May 1942, asking about his house and got him to go and get the keys off of somebody and go and have a look round and whatever. And he's decided that, everything's okay with the house at the moment and he'd quite like to go back to Jersey. So he's busy making boots and shoes for the Essential Commodities Committee in Guernsey. And he says, I've turned out some very good samples in his letter, bigging himself up there. And he's asking if it might be possible for him to go back to Jersey. So there's quite a bit of correspondence there, writing backwards and forwards. So you've got the states of Jersey are writing, saying, well, is this chap any good and whatever, to some of the potential employers in Jersey, as well as to his friend who he'd sent round to go and have a look at the house. Eventually, this goes on for quite a while, and eventually they say, well, okay, we've got no objection of him coming over there to do that work. Now, I don't know what happened, but I've had a good look in the Jersey archives, and he doesn't have a registration card for Jersey, so I'm not sure he was ever allowed to go, and the correspondence trail just goes dead.
Okay, so did you say that he was English by birth?
No, he was Jerseyman.
Okay, so he was Jersey by birth.
Yep.
Do we know why he had come to Guernsey?
I presume he'd come here for work or whatever, but and just got caught here when the occupation happened. So
he's here and he's applying to go back to Jersey. And he's disappeared?
Well,
is he in the Guernsey archives as a registration card?
That I haven't had time to have a look. Wait, he would be anyway.
Yeah, by now he would be, wouldn't he?
Well, yeah, he would have been. And I've got his address. He was at number 4 Candy Road. St. Peterport was where he lived. But so he'd have a registration card anyway. So yeah, it's a bit of a mystery, but so I don't think he made it to Jersey. Either that or somewhere along the line his registration form's gone.
Fell between the stones or something. Yeah.
Gone away,
because we should remind listeners that at some point you could actually leave Guernsey and go during the occupation and have a holiday in Sark. Which we
briefly. They didn't allow it for too long, but no. It was allowed for a while.
Yeah.
And the other way round.
Yeah. Okay, so also we have the one boy crime wave in Jersey.
Crikey, he really
Dennis the Menace.
Well, he wasn't causing the crime wave in Jersey. He was causing the crime wave here, and we tried to export the problem.
Oh right, beg your pardon. So it was in Guernsey. Yeah,
it was indeed. So yeah, this young lad by the surname of Sweetland, who was age 16. The bailiff of Guernsey writes to the bailiff of Jersey, and he says, this boy was charged before the police court today with stealing 9 rabbits, being out after curfew, breaking into and entering a shop in 31 the Pollet and stealing £5, 4 shillings and 9.5 pence in cash, and a quantity of cigarettes and cigars. He seems to like some of the finer stuff that, you could flog, judging by some of this. Concerned together with others in breaking into and entering a lock-up store in the Row Hayes, St. Peter Port, and stealing 120 bars of soap, well, at least to be nice and clean, 48 bars of palm olive soap, 66 pounds of sugar, 1 dozen tins of butter, 6 tins of fruit, and other goods.
So did he have a shopping trolley then?
Oh, God knows. I mean, I know. I was thinking that as I was reading it out, he's got to have had somebody helping him. 6 tins of fruit and other goods, also £1 in cash. That's not it. He's still going. Breaking into it and entering with others. I'm seeing a theme here.
Yeah.
A grocery store at the Villette, St. Martin's, and stealing various goods, including cigarettes and chocolates, etc. And he's still going. Breaking into and entering a lock-up store in the Old Post, St. Martin's, and stealing cigarettes, tobacco, and cigarellos. So clearly not imagining that he was going to flog these things. And now the bailiff says, in the ordinary course of events, he would have been sentenced to a term at Borstal Institution. But this being impossible, I've been asked by the acting Solicitor General whether he could, i.e. the boy, I mean, it's a bit strange he's got to clarify it's not the acting Solicitor General, he wants to be sent to the Jersey Home for Boys for a period of 1 or 2 years, so as to get him away from this environment, which is distinctly bad. We're of the opinion that if he can be properly looked after and supervised, he may become a decent citizen, but not otherwise. Can you help in this matter, as I understand the boy is over the age limit of your institution? Well, the response isn't quite as long. My dear bailiff, I'm afraid there is nothing we can do to help you with regard to, and the name of the young lad. In similar cases here, we apply the Probation Act wherever possible, and I like to think we have sometimes achieved some result. I think this is especially so if agricultural work can be found with a good farmer who is willing to exercise some degree of supervision. I suspect that means give him a good slap if he misbehaves.
Yeah, if he needs it, or when he needs it. Yeah.
And in surroundings sufficiently removed from the temptations of town. So he's basically saying send him to Tortville and get a farmer to look after him.
Yeah.
And that was it. So, yeah. But I thought that was quite an impressive crime wave to get up to in just such a...
do we know if he went to this farmer in Tortville?
I don't know. I've not been able to find any more on it. I just came across that in the Jersey archives the other day when I was looking for something completely different and spotted that, and I thought, that'll be interesting for people.
Okay, moving on, we have this intriguing item you've entitled 1,000 Candles for Jersey.
Yeah, I think we've talked a little bit about this sort of thing, about in kind of general terms, in the islands, swapping stuff or buying stuff off of each other just because we might have ended up with something that Jersey needed and we have, sufficient supplies or excess supplies and Jersey's the other way around or whatever. So, yeah, they basically wanted 1,000 candles, so popped us a letter and we basically wrote back and said, yeah, we can give you 1,000 candles. And they wrote back and said, how much do we owe you? But I don't have a note because they didn't reply on the how much do we owe you, or certainly I haven't got a copy of that document. But I mean, it takes quite a while to organise because they write the first letter 22nd of June, and it's the end of the month before they've got organised. I suppose that's not too bad given that they had to rely on the boat going backwards and forwards.
Okay, right, we are discussing June 1942, and of course this marks, Nick, the second anniversary of the occupation. Our correspondent Herbie Winterflood, he reports that the Guernsey press at the time invited readers to consider that they may have had time to reassess the German folk as fellow humans. This is what the Germans sort of sending out a plea, really, to the local populace. What do you think of us now, boys?
Yeah, indeed. No, this is just a bit of German propaganda, as we've referred to in the past. The front page of the paper became known as the Grange Lodge Times, because that's where the Feldkommandante were based, and it's, nobody believed anything that was printed on the front page of the press. So that was that. The second anniversary of the occupation doesn't go missed in the UK by the printers of the Channel Island Monthly Review. On the 1st of July 42, they are pleased to announce they're back in print, because they actually got stopped from printing the Channel Island Monthly Review because it was felt not to be essential. So they had a period where the Channel Island Monthly Review was basically told, sorry, you haven't got any allocation of paper and you're not allowed to be printed.
So
then there was a big uproar amongst those who'd been evacuated and those with a connection with the islands, and the decision was rescinded, and they were allowed to have an allocation and print the review, which is, it's a valuable piece of keeping in touch with everybody. It listed all the Channel Island societies that had been set up, and it told you about meetings that were going on. They published people's Red Cross messages because people would send them in. So it was, important for people to keep in touch.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should do a special on the review. Steve Foote, maybe we'll get into to talk about that perhaps later on as we progress,
Absolutely.
because I think people would find that very interesting, how evacuees and probably even servicemen on leave were able to keep in touch with.
Oh, yeah, they used to get it sent to them as well.
Yeah, I think that's a special in waiting of that.
It was also used to disseminate information by the military intelligence.
Yeah.
So where they couldn't talk about a raid or anything like that, they might leave it a couple of months and then say, well, here's some information.
Yeah, so that's right. We've been quite oblique about it.
And then the Channel Island Monthly Review had published an article which started with something like, news has recently reached us of.
Yeah.
And then, or some copies of the Guernsey Press have arrived. In England, or the Star, or whatever.
Yeah.
Or someone who's recently arrived a couple of months ago. And it meant that people got news about what was going on and stuff. I mean, some of the stuff they printed, I'm not sure it would make me feel happier about knowing what was going on.
Well, at least it was news, and
absolutely.
And I suppose it does keep people in touch. Okay, moving on. In last month, we talked about the escape attempt to do with the... I'll hand over in a second, but essentially, this had some backwash in Guernsey, and as a result of the recent attempt to escape with photographic materials by some Jerseymen, it was ordered that by 1st of July, all photographic equipment in Guernsey must be handed in, and it would be returned when it was judged that there was no longer any military need for the equipment to be held. Now, purely by coincidence, when Nick came here this afternoon to record, some friends had come in to see me, completely on a different subject, and they happened to be related to the people you discussed last week with regard to this very item. An incredible coincidence.
Yeah, so Peter Hassel, who we talked about, Dave is his...
It was related to his mother. It's quite Byzantine, but
he's a relative and knew him as well, because Peter moved to Canada after the experience
and became Mounties. Dave was telling me.
Yeah, his sons became Mounties. Dave was able to tell us quite a bit. It was a really interesting chat. I enjoyed that chat in one of those completely bizarre situations where you mentioned, we talked about that last month. So it was the ingenious bit of this camera ban would not have stopped what they were doing if the Germans had known how they got the photographs, because it wouldn't have stopped it.
No,
because what he was doing was his dad ran a photography shop, which Dave tells us is still there in Jersey. Actually, I forgot to ask him which one it was, but his dad ran a photography shop which was approved for use by the Germans. As we've mentioned before, the Germans loved having a photograph taken of themselves. They get a photo taken with their mates up at their fortifications or just, around the place and whatever. And there is a story, and I don't know if it's true, but there is a story that there was a sort of not very politically correct description of the gentleman concerned, but I think he was described as Mad Paddy, who used to drink in one of the bars in town, and he was, they clearly thought that they'd have a bit of a laugh at his expense, and that somebody bet him that he could not go up to Cherbourg, and
this is on Guernsey.
Yeah, in Guernsey. This is it's just a photography related thing, and get a photograph of a German in front of one of the guns and bring it to the pub within 48 hours. Oh yeah, he did that. He did. I mean, he did it a very clever way, because I said the Germans like having their photo taken. I mean, he basically went up. They clearly thought, oh, this bloke's a bit straight. He's chatting to them and whatever. And then he said, oh, can I take your picture, sort of thing. Oh yeah. Oh, in front of you, you're gonna be lovely. Somehow got away with it.
So this is a Strasbourg battery as well. So this would have been a sensitive area.
Yeah. But anyway, Peter Hassel obviously went about it a different way. He was making surreptitious copies of German ones. So by banning civilians from having cameras wouldn't have made the blindest bit of difference. But clearly the Germans didn't know that's how he got the pictures. He must have kept quiet about that. But they talk about you can have them back when then there's no longer a military need for the equipment to be held. Well, that turned out to be liberation. Basically, there were people that had cameras that held them back.
Yeah, they just didn't give them in.
Much like radios, but if you were to get caught. I mean, there are some photographs that were taken surreptitiously at the airport, which I've been shown, which were taken from under a gentleman's jacket while sat in he was working in some form of transport, and he surreptitiously took some photographs of aircraft up at the airport. There's the obviously the well-known one of the Renault tank by the Old Forge.
Yeah.
And there are various others as well.
Okay, well, you mentioned radios, and Reverend Ord makes his first appearance in our episode today. Reverend Ord reports that wireless radio sets were to be called in, but the onus this time was on owners to hand the sets in themselves at appointed stores around the island. This is Guernsey. The postal vans that had previously collected them had been dismantled or in bits in Amherst Brickyard. Amherst is one of the suburbs of Peterport. Our friend Colonel Nakfus,
best.
Yeah, said that this order was at the behest of his superiors, and sets were to be placed under the custody of the Feldkommandantur. This appears to be trying to stop local heroes hearing about RE activity over France, Ord believes. The punishment for not handing sets in was to be 6 months imprisonment or 3,000 marks. Now, you've converted this. This is over £13,000.
Yeah, basically a small car.
Yeah.
Well, you can't buy that many cars these days for 13 grand, but, it's...
Yeah, well, we bought our first house for 19,000. But okay, and Ord and his wife actually send a Red Cross message home to the UK, which says, "You'll be sorry, Uncle Bebeke has passed away quite unexpectedly. His cheerful company sorely missed." Now, this was family code for the fact that they'd had to hand in their radio. Ord also recalls that many Germans themselves were indignant that the sets had been called in, and that they tried to make amends by permitting those on whom they are billeted to listen to the BBC, because the Germans that were billeted people themselves wanted to hear the latest news from the BBC. So effectively, Nick, what they were doing is they were turning a blind eye at this point in the war.
Yeah, absolutely, and it went on for quite some time. I mean, my great grandparents had two Germans billeted on them. One of them was not very pleasant. The other one, was quite happy to be here rather than the Eastern Front, but really wanted to be at home. And he used to wander down. He had a radio. He'd tune into the BBC. He'd wander down, announce that he was going for a walk, and basically he'd walk up and down the road outside the house to make sure that nobody caught them. And, he'd have a smoke or whatever and walk up and down to make sure that nobody caught them listening to the radio. But there does seem to, have been a general feeling by the German officers that it was a pretty harsh thing and they didn't really want it. But it came from France. The order came from from
From
France.
Paris, yeah.
So they had to comply with it. Now it was to varying levels of success. They didn't bring. I don't know why, but the Germans never twigged that they didn't get as many radios this time round as they had the first time round before they gave them back at Christmas 1940.
So they hadn't really kept a sort of census of the radio sets. It wouldn't have occurred to them at that time, really, would it?
It surprises me. Their love of
Germans being Germans.
love of administration, etc.,
Yeah.
and they document everything else so well. But so that seemed to go amiss. So lots of people hid their radios. Now, it depended what sort of radio you had, because if you had one of the really, I mean, some of these were quite impressive looking things. These radios.
Yeah, like radiograms.
Yeah, I mean,
Pieces of furniture.
Yeah, they were. And in nice wooden cases.
Walnut veneer.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, they had valves and stuff like that in them, so these take time to heat up and all that sort of malarkey. So some of them must have been quite difficult to hide, but then some more modern ones probably not so much of a problem. But this went on. Lesotho in Jersey has a little bit to say about it, and his thought and mine as well is it's not so much about them, hearing about the RAF bombing and stuff like that. It was more the Germans were getting a bit flappy about maybe there might be an invasion, either in the
Channel Islands,
or in mainland France, that things something might happen, and obviously the way to get word was to have some sort of coded message from the BBC or whatever.
Because the Americans as well were in the war now, weren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if they were in Europe in any particular force.
Not in any particular strength.
But I mean, in terms of what was going on, there was a lot of RAF activity, which was apparent in the islands, in which case it could be heard. And I think one of the diarists makes the point of saying, we can hear the planes and they're going across the channel to France as opposed to German planes going to the UK. It wasn't going well in Russia at the time. But I think in 42, the summer of 42, the Germans had retaken Tobruk, I think.
Yeah, they had a year.
And so it was finally balanced. But so anyway, our friend the Sota.
Yeah, he's got quite a lot to say on it. So he says it was shown we should lose our sets, and the realisation of their value in keeping us even remotely in touch. There has been ever-rising tide of anger against the order spreading around the island. Duplicated leaflets have been appearing, stressing the injustice and urging not to hand in their sets. And these were issued as issue number 1 by the British Patriots. Those so aroused the ire of the Germans at the Fell Gendarmerie, they'd arrested a very mixed bag of well-known people this morning, believed to be as hostages until the writer of the pamphlet is found. There are many wild rumours passing around the town, but as I saw one of the men arrested at 9 a.m., I know the foregoing is true. Other rumours are all German troops are leaving within 6 weeks. Clearly wasn't going to happen. And garrison duties will be undertaken by the OT. Well, that wasn't going to happen either. But he said, it makes sense. If that's the rumour that's going around, it does make sense, because we talked about him coming across the goose-stepping OT workers.
No.
Oh, sorry, the OT, overseers. And how funny that was in last month. So, if they look like they're being trained to undertake some sort of defensive activity, maybe that was it. But, he talks about the first time for many months armed patrols were around on Saturday night, probably thinking that there's going to be some sort of demonstration against Saturday's arrests, thus making my not unusual curfew breaking a little more precarious than usual. In fact, by complete coincidence, I saw that Jersey Archives had a post on their Facebook page today with a picture of Lesotho and a little bit about him. Yeah. And it talks about his love of curfew breaking and getting involved in the odd illicit bit.
Yeah, he's becoming quite a hero of this podcast, isn't
he? He is. I just think he's brilliant. But he also notes that he's quite grateful that he's not one of those who clearly counts as being a notable person on the island, particularly when there's a threat of 20 more arrests, which was making, people more nervous. And said, there was a proper panic among people who, until this news became public, were being very brave in keeping their sets. But yeah, he says, thanks B, I don't come under the heading of prominent citizen, for I am, like everybody else, not anxious. Now, there is a story behind this, and I find this quite interesting because I'm not quite sure why the Germans didn't try this tactic in Guernsey with the likes of the Guernsey Underground News Service or GASP, because they could have tried this. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, they did threaten to take hostages in both islands, and they did occasionally do that. But they never did, as far as I can tell, they never did it in relation to guns or GASP. Because this, obviously, this resulted in, these guys having to give themselves up because they were threatening that they were going to do that. And, these guys could either be imprisoned, and Nakfus, put out a really nasty notice, which was not signed by him or by his underlings, making some quite serious threats. These guys could either be imprisoned or shot or whatever. So, as they came under, the guys that were doing it came under a bit of pressure to give themselves up because, there was basically two brothers, George Galachon and his brother Herbert. They basically had to give themselves up because otherwise these guys were going to get shot or put in prison. They got a fairly tough sentence, 5 years for doing this, which, I mean, for Herbert, it turned out to be he got moved around lots of prisons in France, and he was in fairly horrible conditions. His brother George, I'm not sure if maybe George was taken quite seriously ill or something, but he does end up back in Jersey in 1943. So, there must have been some reason why he came back, but that's not to say he, lived in peace and quiet in Jersey. He was harassed by the Germans and ended up in Biberach internment camp eventually. So, he didn't have a great time of it either, to be honest. But yeah, it just shows the lengths that they would go to make the occupation comply, the population comply with their orders. And just because they didn't want people to know the truth, about what was going on. But equally, they were worried about coded messages, which is funny because whilst I can see it in France, the resistance rise up, unlikely to happen here.
No, and the other thing that's caught my eye about this report by Lesotho, beg your pardon, is our friend Colonel Nakfus emerges again, and he has an understudy. Please tell me that's a spelling mistake.
No, he really was called Dr. Gasher.
Okay,
I must find out a bit about him. Actually,
yeah, with a name like that,
unless it's a spelling mistake by Lesotho, but I've not looked.
Dr. Gasher, okay. And of course, Lesotho also has got a nice turn of phrase here when he talks about the push bikes. Our friends are after more push bikes.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like he talks about our local jerry builder and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so what he's saying, the first 1,750 were taken at the rate of 100 to 250 per parish by the license number. So again, the Germans being quite methodical in Jersey there. So Lesotho. Can I just ask? Does his diary go on through all the way? Oh, so he'll be with us for the whole ride.
He's here for the whole ride.
Okay, we're back in Guernsey. Louis Guillemette, whose diary has just come on stream in 1942. Louis Guillemette was the liaison between the Guernsey government, the truncated government controlling committee, and also the German headquarters. How do you pronounce that, Nick?
Feldkommandantur.
And he's talking about the radios and said he has assurances that the sets would be held in care. He records that in Guernsey that there was a suspicion of the radio sets would be handed out to the military. Going on back to Reverend Ord, and this is quite telling, Ord records that he had been sent the report prepared by Dr. Revel, who was the Chief Medical Officer for Health for Guernsey for the period in 1941. So Ord is being sent this as a sort of honest broker, I think, or to record this. And Dr. Revel records that the anxiety, as there's a good degree of anxiety about the overcrowding and insanitary conditions where foreign slaves are herded into the older parts of St. Peter Port. The report goes on to chastise the German authorities with failure to institute proper delousing from troops returning from Russia. And I asked you just before we came on air, troops did actually come back to the islands from Russia, and why he's concerned, the doctor's concerned, is that typhus was rife amongst these troops. So these, I think you were telling me, were people that had effectively been wounded and almost invalided out, or invalided back to Guernsey.
Yeah, that was more of the case now.
And they must have brought some horrific tales back to and scaring the living daylights out of some of the other troops that were here.
Horrific diseases. Now, have a guess. Do you think the Germans like Dr. Revel or not?
Well, I would think that he's quite outspoken, because he also reports in detail here about the calorific shortfall, whereby the current ration was a subsistence diet. A working man needed far more than that. And so, I can't imagine he did he eventually was he deported?
No, they tried to sack him. Now, bearing in mind, this guy was relatively elderly by the time the occupation started, but he came back as volunteered to take this.
Right. So he had retired, and then he'd taken up a post again.
Yeah. So he effectively was like the medical officer of health.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what I think that's what the job title was back then,
and took it very seriously by the sounds of it.
And he did, and the Germans just didn't like him at all. They particularly didn't like every time you mentioned malnutrition or starvation or anything like that. That really annoyed him. So they actually demanded that he be sacked by the controlling committee, and there was a lot of argy-bargy about that. And the upshot was he wasn't in the end. But it went on for quite a while, and there was some pressure put on the controlling committee about that whole situation. The Germans even went as far as suggesting who his replacement should be. Not that would have got them anywhere, really. I think they just wanted anybody apart from Revel, because I think he must have just been thinking, nope, I'm going to report it as it is.
Nothing to lose.
And, as I say, he was quite elderly. He probably thought, well, stuff it.
The reason I ask about deportation, I don't mean deportation in view of particularly what he was doing or saying, but Revel isn't a Channel Island name, and I wondered if he had qualified for the deportation that took place later in 42 and 43.
He was too old.
He was too old to go. So he remained here then. Did he see out the war?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good for him. So he's another almost hero that sort of pops up.
Because clearly he was putting himself at great risk. Mind you, the controlling committee were, putting themselves at risk by, they don't get enough praise for this.
No, exactly.
They stood up to the Germans. They could have just gone, all right then, we'll sack him and appoint this other bloke. There was protracted correspondence about this.
Yeah, and in fact,
and some very, very fractious meetings.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't put it all in the script, but I was reading Guillemet's diary where he details the fact that the Guernsey government really did stand up to the Germans far more than people realise, and in fact, some of the time he had to do the standing up himself.
Exactly.
And it led to screaming fits in meetings from the Germans.
Yeah. I mean, and some of the things that Guillemet got called by our friend the Baron later on in the occupation.
Well, I understand that Louis Guillemet was the subject of some name calling after the war, but I think we'll get to that in due course.
I mean, anybody who's in the government and got an enemy machine gun post across the road from their house, which basically points at their house and the crossroads. Yeah. I mean, and he was criticised because he used to occasionally go fishing with a German officer and but frankly, he was probably scoping out what there was in terms of chances of getting any rabbits or anything like that.
Well, yes, he had a boat, and I think some Germans basically said to him, "You're going to take us across because we want to shoot some rabbits."
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
You're not got a lot of choice. And, and people will say, oh, well, of course he'd say that they stood up to the, he's got vested interest, but there's lots of evidence that they did, and it's just not, it does drive me a bit nuts when people just go, oh, they just complied.
Yeah, well, we're being channel liners, we're particularly sensitive to that. Okay, now there's also a little bit here. This is the fallout of the local policemen that have been convicted for various crimes around stealing food, and they, Nick, had been the ones that were deported were marched handcuffed through the streets of St. Peter Port to the docks to be deported. I mean, this is something that resonates to this day, and one has to be a bit careful about what one says about it. The controversy continues to. I mean, really, by the end of June 42, they're marched away to be deported. Really, does that draw the line under it as far as the occupation is concerned, or does it raise its head in the episodes to come?
No, that's pretty much it.
That's pretty much it. But as I say, it's a controversy that still rages to this very day. Still with Ord, we look at some of the military rumours. Now, this is a rumour, but these rumours are quite interesting or amusing in themselves, so it's worth repeating them, but we must underline it's a rumour. There had been a rumour in June 1942 that there had been a commando raid on the Hanwha. Now, the Hanwha is a lighthouse off the southwest coast of Guernsey, very, very close to the coast. But anyway, so there's a lighthouse there, quite a big one, whereby the Royal Navy had landed and taken the German guards away. But it was said that these Royal Naval Commandos had been local policemen, and that they had rung up the St. Peter Port police station and wished the person that answered the phone good luck. And Ord is absolutely incredulous that people would believe such God. But these rumours were seized upon.
Yeah, absolutely. It's because people actually wanted to believe that something like that had happened. It's like, let's not give up hope. I mean,
it's complete and utter rubbish.
I'm not sure there would have even been a telephone line between the lighthouse and Guernsey. I'm fairly certain that there wasn't. So that would have been a problem. I'm not really sure you want to go to the Hanwha for any particular reason, were you commandos? Although it is quite funny because, of course, Operation Dryad happens in September 1942, which is the raid on the Casquettes.
Which is just off Alderney. And,
which is a lighthouse, and we'll get to that in September 42. Yeah. But, if you've heard of people like Anders Lassen, who actually is the only VC won by a member of the SAS.
I think yesterday was the
anniversary of when he was killed.
Of his being killed in action.
1 month before the end of the war. Yeah. How unlucky is that?
Well, being killed is pretty unlucky as well.
Well, yeah, I know, but for him to die. Yeah. But he took part in that raid. He took part in Basalt. He was also up for a raid that didn't happen, where he was going to come into St. Peter Port in kayak along with a couple of others and attach limpet mines to shipping in St. Peter Port Harbour, but that didn't go ahead in the end. No. I mean, they were going to do it in January, so I mean that wasn't the best month to do it. So it's interesting that this rumour happens in June, and then we do get a lighthouse raid, which does get quite a lot of publicity. Not although the Germans don't kind of acknowledge it at all, but the rumour itself makes it around the island very, very quick.
But this particular rumour does actually turn up in another diary. Violet Carey also reports the story, but regards it as being a rumour and is quite tickled by it. There's another story which is quite interesting here. The story is being told at the time, it was prevalent in Guernsey at the time, of a non-English speaking German billeting officer who, when looking for suitable residences for future billeting, had written on his forms certain house names as being tradesman's entrance, shut the gate, and beware of the dog. And when being asked about this, it is said that he said he thought this was Guernsey patois. Of course, this is another, well, we'd like to think it was true, but
it's very funny if it is.
It is, yeah. And of course, again, we've talked earlier about aircraft. Ord notes that the sound of aircraft passing on to France was a reversal of the direction traffic started at the occupation, he means, of course, that the prevalent direction was from the UK to the European mainland. With regard to Russia, which we touched on just now, Reverend Ord, notes more and more troops were being withdrawn to be sent to the Russian front. Presumably, he had this confirmed by his German contacts. We should perhaps remind listeners that Ord was a fluent German speaker and was quite well connected through his church to Germans that came to his services and confided in him. And then he tells this wonderful story, Nick, of two ladies living in the countryside parishes who, during the curfew at night, heard a series of thumps outside their back garden. In the morning, they found that the entire stock of firewood gathered by the Germans who lived next door had been thrown over the wall for the benefit of the two ladies. This left them going for several weeks. So these are troops that are supposedly going off to Russia and benefited the lady with all this firewood. And finally, he reports seeing gangs of foreign slave workers in St. Sampson's, which is a small town up in the north of the island, ripping up the roadway for the light railway track. But he describes the slave labourers as being in an absolutely appalling state.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of our previous guests, actually, Tim Osborne, is a bit of an expert on them. On the. In fact, I'd go as far as saying he knows the most about the German light railway of anybody in Guernsey.
He leads a very good tour from time to time about the railway.
He does. I was gutted because the last time he was doing that, I was actually away, so I couldn't go on it. But he's got a whole series of Facebook posts where he talks about the trains and where they went and the fact that Lille was like Clapham Junction.
You can still find clinker from the fireboxes of the trains along Lille Common.
Yeah.
I was telling our friends that were in the studio earlier, and I found a piece just the other day. It's just lying around on the surface.
I only because Tim told me I know where there's some railway track as well.
Oh, right.
It's not where you'd normally look. It's on the beach.
Ah, well, you must tell me after we go off air.
Well, no, I'll mention it now because anybody in Guernsey might or visiting Guernsey might want to pop along and have a look. So if you go to the Vale Castle and you park in that car park across the road from the castle, immediately below the entrance.
This is where the cafe is, Woody's. That one?
Yeah. No. You want to park?
Ah, right. Yes,
the one next to you, the yard where all those boats are.
Yep.
The one that's immediately across from where you walk up the hill. If you park there and then you go to the edge of the car park, not too close to the edge, obviously, go and have a look over. You'll see an old water pipe which runs down to there. If you look at that, parallel to that is a bit of German light railway track.
I've seen it and now it makes sense. Yeah.
Wasn't put there by the Germans. It was good old Guerns repurposing stuff that had been left behind by the Germans. And when they were building that pipe, that wastewater pipe to go out there, they used it for moving stuff around. They put a bit of German railway track.
Oh, I think we can take a photograph of that and tweet that out.
I've already got a photograph of it, so yeah, we can.
Of course, you have. Silly me.
Well, I had to go. Well, when Tim told me about it one day, I can't remember where I was. I bumped into Tim somewhere, and he told me about it, and I thought, well, I better go and have a look. But yeah, so the probably the last place you'd look for a bit of German railway track because they ripped up most of it.
Yeah, some of it was down for a very, very short space of time as well, right at the end, I believe, out by Luray.
Yeah, no, it wasn't around for long, but yeah, Lille was like Clapham Junction. I read something the other day. There was one that ran up by the KG5, which was a camp for Todd workers. I must check. I've not looked at Tim's notes to see if that was the case. Or
not. KG5 is towards the middle of the island, and that's not something that I've ever heard before.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Well, honestly, don't know because that was a Todd camp there. So
okay, we move on to some aerial activity. On the 2nd of June, 1942, there was an incident here with Pilot Officer Blackwood of the Royal New Zealand Air Force, 140 Squadron. He came down off the Casquettes. This is the lighthouse you've just been talking about off Alderney. What happened there, Nick?
Yeah, so he was flying a Spitfire. It was a PR, so it was a photo reconnaissance PR4 X4502 for anybody that particularly wants to go and look it up. 140 Squadron. And we've mentioned it before, but these islands are very well photographed by the RAF.
Yes, yes.
There are literally thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs that you can go and have a look at online. We've shared that before, but I'll stick it on the show notes in case you missed that episode. He took off from RAF Mount Farm in Oxfordshire, 11:20 in the morning, and was lost without a trace. He is commemorated on the Runnymede Memorial. Now, later it appears that there was some information came out that an intercepted German radio message claimed a British fighter shot down in the sea off the Casquettes at the time of this sortie. So it may well be that was what happened to him. He actually enlisted as an armourer in 1938, so pre-war, but gained rapid promotion and became a sergeant pilot. And he was under training on the 24th of April 1941. So he sadly was not flying for too long. He is commemorated on the memorial here at the airport as well in Guernsey. But he got an OBE for this airman displayed courage of a high order in 10 successive enemy raids and has energetically assisted in raising the morale of the station by his example.
And also, regrettably, on the 29th of June 1942, a hurricane came to grief.
Yeah, this was Sergeant W.J.A. McLaughlin, Royal Canadian Air Force. Not so much information on this one. He was flying a Hurricane BE-484. He was on 175 Squadron, and he was on an operational flight over the coast of France to attack enemy shipping, as there was an awful lot of that going on around this area. The Germans had a bit of a problem as well, so it wasn't just Allied aircraft. 24th June 1942, Focke-Wulf FW-190 from JG2 got rammed by a landing aircraft at Guernsey Airport, causing 30% damage. I love the way they attribute the percentage of damage to these things. There were quite a few accidents, to be fair, although Jersey had more because we talked about that. There was the chap who was in charge who got the runway grass cut short, so they kept crashing into things. So yeah, that's it for aerial activity. There's not too much more information about those two, unfortunately.
And the last program we did was a special because Nick and I couldn't coordinate our diaries. I did a special about my grandfather, William Pengelly, RN, and in June 1942 he was aboard HMS Medway. It's all covered in the previous episode, but essentially he was aboard Medway, which was a large submarine depot ship. And he was on board when they were torpedoed on the 30th of June 1942. And I remember him talking about it when I was a child. He had warned about their portholes being open above the waterline when they were in Alexandria. They went out on convoy, got hit, and sure enough, the ship went down like a stone. It was sunk by U-372, which itself was sunk later, not much later, and it was interesting because when they sunk the submarine, or when his son, Heinz Joachim Neumann, the submarine, was sunk, amongst the crew they found a Lebanese civilian who has never been explained, and it turned out that the thinking was that he was a spy. So anyway, Grandad survived, was a lovely man, and I knew him well, and the captain of HMS Medway was Captain Rock Keane, and my grandfather's exemplary service was signed off by that very captain. So that was that's nice thread there.
While we're mentioning that, because I know he was at Narvik.
Yes.
There's a podcast at the moment. They've just released episode 2 today, actually. Moments in Time World War II edition podcast. It's two people that I know, Chris and Alina, and a few others who have put that together, and that's currently dealing with the Norway and the battles of Narvik is today, actually. They've got some stuff in there, and there's about 30 seconds.
Yes,
I make an appearance for about 30 seconds voicing one of the testimonies.
Well, Grandad was there as well. He was aboard HMS Kimberley.
That's why I mentioned it. Yeah, I thought, because he was there.
So please follow that podcast, and
I'll put a link to that one as well. It's really good. They do some excellent stuff on various different topics. It just happens that they're doing Norway at the moment.
Also, we're probably going to blow our own trumpet a little bit now. I think our figures for downloads to date are approaching 12,000 downloads.
We are getting there, yeah.
And we thank every one of you that listens, and I'd like to shout out a few names. Kester and Ian, who came to visit me at Fort Grey in my capacity as a visitor attendant at Guernsey Napoleonic fort. Anybody in Guernsey wants to come and see me there. Also, John Guernsey from, I think it's Virginia. John, I'll be meeting you in May when you're here, and I'm trying to introduce you to Nick as well.
Excellent.
Thank you for following us and your kind words. I believe it will be your 7th or 8th trip to Guernsey in this, our 80th anniversary year. To Judith and her husband that's been in touch. They're now having asked to come on one of my tours, avid listeners of the podcast. So we thank you for your listening, and thank you for hooking up with me later on. It'll be June the 1st. If anybody that's listening is coming to Guernsey in this very special year about the 80th anniversary of our liberation, Nick you've passed your first hurdle as a qualified guide.
I have.
And you'll be taking tours with Joe May.
Yep.
So Nick and Joe would be very pleased to meet you if you wish to come over and contact us. And I'm also a qualified tour guide at Guernsey Walking Tours. Both of us are really interested in meeting anybody that follows the podcast, because we really enjoy everything, all the feedback that we get from you, and we're gobsmacked that we
it's brilliant.
We've got this following. It's fantastic.
Even like the SOE, we've got a secret agent in Jersey as well.
Well, yes, we can't mention his name, can we? He wouldn't be secret.
Not at the moment. We've infiltrated Jersey with the Guernseyman.
Yeah,
who is? We're going to record some stuff with him shortly. In fact, he was recounting the fact that he's got a slightly difficult trip for. He's coming here with a Willys Jeep for liberation with someone else, and the only way they can get back is they've got to go via St Malo because of the ferries. But they're making the pilgrimage here from Jersey to take part in our parade. So yes, we'll keep him undercover for now. But he knows who he is. He's listening. He's also working on a guest blog post for the blog as well.
We've had 2 books published, 2 works of fiction published recently in Guernsey. Teresa Laflemme's sequel, Fistful of Barbed Wire. I should have written this down. Sorry, Teresa. But Teresa will be coming in to talk to me, and so will local author Jenny O'Brien, who writes detective series based in Dublin. Turned her hand to the occupation, and you're going to be hosting a sold out event at the Guernsey Literary Festival.
I am. I'm talking to Jenny about the book at the Guernsey Literary Festival on the 26th, and as you say, it's sold out.
So it's no point in telling you where it is. I'm sure if there were returns and things,
I'm sure. People might. So but we're going to have her on the podcast anyway. Both of them to talk about their books. But I'm really looking forward to having that chat with Jenny. We've had a preliminary chat.
Yeah, and I'll be talking to both Teresa and Jenny and reviewing the books with them. And
if anybody wants to have a look at a review of Jenny's book, I put one out on the blog. So islandfortress.com. There's without giving too much away, there is a review on there about my thoughts on the book, which I think Jenny was quite pleased and
no spoilers though.
/ relieved. No, there are no spoilers on
Good. So if you wish to get in hold of Nick and I with suggestions or inquiries about any stage of the occupation of the Channel Islands, you can get hold of us at occupied@gnetradio.com, and you can pick the podcast up where you pick the podcast up, but do check GNet Radio, www.gnetradio.com for our music programs. And of course, we should also say that we're funded and sponsored by Guernsey Arts, so please look at their website as well for all of the events artistic that are going on in the islands. Anything more, Nick, before we go?
Yeah, I did notice today that there's a new liberation trail of exhibitions, which is which was mentioned on social media today. It's been organised where you can go and I know the one at Island Archives is called Papers, Please. So I'm guessing that they've got some display of the ID cards and stuff like that. But it goes all around town. There's some quite good stuff going on by the looks of it. So I'll stick that on the show notes as well for anybody local.
Yeah, and finally, for those of you that like gin, I shall be commencing my liberation tours of St. Peter Port in conjunction with Whedon's Gin. So it'll be a walking tour around St. Peter Port, visiting and looking at occupation locations there, and then I would hand you over to Luke Whedon of Whedon's Gin.
For some
he will
gin in a bunker.
In the Vivier bunker, which has now got a distillery in it, and he will be pleased to offer you a gin tasting, and he's got various rums he brews and distills and all that sort of stuff. So you can check out Whedon's Gin and you can check out Guernsey Walking Tours. There's a link to it there. I think that's everything today.
Yeah, I think we've probably covered pretty much everything. Oh, we're going to be up at the Specsavers Tea Dance, aren't we?
That's right. On the afternoon of the 8th of May for about 3 hours. We're setting up our stall, literally.
Indeed. We're going to be up there with
Prior Library.
Prior Library are going to be there as well. But yeah, we're going to be up there chatting to people as they come in. So if you are listening and if you are a listener, do come and say hello to us while we're there. And yeah, we'll be willing to chat to anybody who wants to talk about the occupation. You can't stop us, frankly. I mean, it's pretty difficult.
Yeah, so we're very busy. So in 2 weeks' time, we will be talking about July 1942.
Yeah, quite a lot happening in 42 in July. So I look forward to it.
Okay, right. I think it's à la prochaine from me and
à la prochaine from me.
Okay, take
Cheery.
care. Yeah, cheery. Bye-bye.
5 to 7. He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb.